Hi, and welcome to another episode of the South Texas Power Lunch. I'm Matt Duke, the managing attorney for the South Texas Business Lawyers. And today we have Amanda Godlewski, who is a CPG, which is consumer product good attorney here in South Texas. And we're going to talk about all things startups in a variety of industries, including consumer product goods. It's summertime, and I can't tell you how many ideas as going around on vacations and doing things with kids that I've looked and gone, man, what a great idea for a great product. Well, if you've got an idea for a product, you're a CPG inventor or founder, and this could be exactly what you need to hear as you're getting started. I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did. Let's go ahead and jump in. Amanda, thanks so much for coming on here today. I'm super excited to talk to a colleague that we can talk war stories and all of our pain and successes that we've had. But thanks so much for coming on with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. I appreciate it.
So let's talk CPG. Let's talk startups. Let's just nerd out like a bunch of startup lawyers will do. First question for you is, what do you think is the most common problem that you experience with founders when you have that first meeting with them and say, okay, how are we going to work together? What is it like? Is there something that you have as a common theme for talking with a founder first off as a lawyer?
Sure. I think one of the first issues is just foundational issues, just them understanding what they have to start off with to really build something that they can scale.
Right.
A lot of times people come in and they have a great idea or they have a great name.
And
they're kind of building a business around the name, which
Right.
is, tough sometimes.
I got some
especially
more
with
stories on great names going bad.
Right.
Cease and desist letters are usually the key theme that are in those great names.
You're searching the USPTO and realize everybody figured out that great name
That's
and built
exactly
business
right.
around it.
That's exactly.
So I think, just the foundational pieces, like understanding what it takes to create a brand and market it and get it out there and have everything tied up legally, which usually it's out there, but there's a lot of loose ends to tie up.
There's a lot of loose ends that are on there. So, let me back up a little bit and go back. So give us a little bit about your history and your experience, because you've got some really cool experience in the CPG industry. I should have started with that, but tell me more about, I just wanted to jump into war.
Sure, yeah.
Tell us more about your career.
Sure. So I've been a practicing attorney for over 12 years, and I've been in the CPG space for about 8 years.
Okay.
So for those that don't know, CPG is consumer packaged goods. So
Right.
it's food and beverage and beauty products. And I started my career at Stonyfield, the organic yogurt company, back when they were...
My babies love Stony.
Yes, great product. Back when they were owned by Danone. I was actually the first corporate counsel there, second legal hire.
Wow.
So I was just jumping in feet first and trying to get things organized, kind of getting contracts in place, that sort of thing.
Right.
And I was there for some time. And after that, I had my own firm and I worked with other CPG businesses and transitioned over to Nutrabolt. They make the C4 energy drinks as well as supplements. Yes, yes. I was over there and was senior corporate counsel, and I worked on both domestic and international initiatives, which was really cool. Get to see how things are done across the pond. And then I had all that experience and all that knowledge and realized there was a lot of these topics, items could just get synthesized down, and small and medium, emerging brands and businesses could really benefit from this knowledge and this expertise. And that's why I started both Mija Learns, which is a education company teaching founders how to build and scale, and my law firm, Godlewski Law.
Which, it's interesting. You and I have both been in-house corporate counsel and then also as external counsel. The in-house counsel role, it's fascinating to me because of the relationships and the depth that you get to build. When I went in-house, I'll never forget, I had a good friend of mine say, when you're outside counsel to someone, it's like a la carte. Like, okay, I need this paper, this contract for this project. Then you don't hear anything. Mm-hmm. Then they come back and they're going to order, we've got this issue. Can you tell us and research it? In-house though, it's like a full-on buffet. It's left and right. They want this, that, yesterday, today, tomorrow, like, just the volume of everything that comes through. How was your experience as in-house counsel?
I loved in-house. It's great because you get to work with people that aren't lawyers. You
right.
work with the marketing department and all these great campaigns.
Right.
You work with research and development. You work with finance. I mean, you're working with some key stakeholders to make things happen. And I loved it because it's just exciting to grow a business, to see it thrive, to see it out there, to see it get traction, engagement with the consumers. So I had no issue with that coming at me from all over
You're
the
okay
place.
with the buffet coming at you.
Oh, yeah. I thought
it's always
great.
fun too, and being in house, and I serve as outside general counsel for several companies. Is you actually get to see them in the strategy implementation part. As external counsel, okay, we're going to do this project, right? Well, here's your contract. You don't hear anything from them. Then they come back 6 months later and like, hey, how'd that thing go? Oh, it was good, or it was a complete disaster. This didn't work. They give you the lowdown. But being, as a partner, which is great, I do miss that part, was you got to be, engaged and see how that implementation was going. The strategy was changed. Did you experience that?
Oh, I love that. Yeah. You got to be a part of the strategy. And that, I think, and that is kind of what I try to educate clients and founders now, because you've got a great idea and you're trying to run with it. You've got to have that long-term strategy. And sometimes if you come to the attorney a little too late, it's hard to pull that strategy back, that initiative back if something goes wrong or if you're infringing on someone's rights. So it's always good to have somebody on hand that you can reach out to and say, hey, I want to run this past you, or we're thinking about doing this thing. Do you see any red flags? Because that was really one of my value adds, right? In-house is like you're kind of there and available. So if people want to try something out, they want to do something different, you can kind of measure, well, what's the real true risk here? Is it something that we can take on, or is it something that could really have disastrous consequences for the business as a whole?
And that's, it's interesting because from an outside, when we're, external counsel, a lot of people say, oh, if I call the lawyer now, it's just going to be too expensive. But you don't so many times, and I've got some clients that are very good at this, they will, 15-minute phone call. Hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? And they really engage to help them develop the overall strategy, whatever the project is. You experience that almost daily in an in-house counsel setting, but you don't see it that much in external because people are like, oh, I don't want to call a lawyer. They'll charge me something. Whereas in-house, well, they've already paid your salary, so they don't think about it that way. But it's the right thing to do, is to get engaged with counsel to make sure you're understanding those risks.
Oh, absolutely. Because, we don't want to say no, right? We want to help you. And maybe that means...
Well, that's not always true for in-house counsel, and you people know who you are. There are some people, they were the no's.
That's true.
There's many, lawyers that their job is like the CFOs, right? No, we're not going to spend that money. Lawyer, no, it's not legal. Versus you, which, I just hear you going right now is, well, maybe not this way, but if we can mold it this way, we can work within the confines of the law to accomplish your goals. That's the critical part right there, is to be able to, how do we get the deal done in a risk efficient manner versus just no, which I can't tell you how many lawyers, I thought that was like their only word they could speak sometimes when I dealt with them, for transactions.
Which is why it's so important to have like a great working relationship with an attorney that you understand is collaborative and wants to help you and is not going to just kind of shut it down at the outset. So that has been kind of my professional goal, to make sure that I'm always finding ways to pivot and make things happen for brand owners.
So why CPG? Why did that attract you? Was it just the opportunity, to work for that company? What got you into CPG?
For me, it's really working with mission-driven brands. Brands that are really rooted in some type of goods. You're either creating a healthy product or helping people live their best life. That really drew me to it. And like I said, just working with the teams is so much fun. Nothing like putting out a social media campaign and seeing it run out there and getting all the engagement. It's great.
It is fun. For me, we've got several CPG clients, and for my kids to be like, oh, that's yours. And we've got a lot of hospitality chefs, creators that are creating goods and services that are out there. It's the same thing. It's so cool to be able to experience their products or their service and that sort of thing. It's kind of one of the cool things. My kids think I'm cool because of that stuff, not because, I'm a lawyer, it's just because of what I know. In San Antonio, how long have you been in San Antonio?
I've been here it'll be 6 years now.
6 years.
In May, yes.
But you've been around like the community, South Texas, for longer than that, right?
For 6 years.
6 years.
Yep.
What, how has been your experience with CPG in this market? I mean, we're broadcasting here from Geekdom, which this is an amazing place that is incubating and helping people get their creations and their innovations, started. But beyond that, what's your take on CPG within San Antonio?
Well, we really needed more of an infrastructure. We needed a lot more resources and education. I'm actually part of a steering committee here with San Antonio CPG.
Okay.
So it's a trade group based here out of San Antonio that is working to empower CPG brands to grow and scale and get connected to the type of resources that can really help them get to the next level, which is usually funding too. And I think in terms of things that are needed, we need the resources and the education, you need the network, the funding. The funding is the hardest part because unlike a tech product where you can go and you don't have a lot of overhead, there's not a lot of issues with, supply and demand and my product, stuff is caught up overseas. There are so many variables that make the margin for CPG goods that much less. It's hard to get investors on board. It's hard to get dollars into these brands. So building a brand that is, completely consumer focused, driven, with great sales. I mean, you really have to have kind of a stellar resume to be able to sell yourself to get that funding.
And funding's tough in San Antonio to begin with. I mean, we have to be honest and a little bit brutal in that truth today. Now that will change. I mean, the infrastructure is, ever growing for it. The other part I see on the CPG side is on the manufacturing side. I've got some great examples with regard to bottling and those sort of things and canning. So that way, those type of consumers, there's lots of those ideas that are coming here with chefs that, have moved from across the country that are here trying to create those things. But there's also other manufacturing. We used to have very heavy manufacturing here in San Antonio, and then we've really gone away from that, as did a lot of, America getting away and export or outsourcing manufacturing to China and elsewhere. But is that something you see as well with manufacturing capacity,
Absolutely.
Here in San Antonio?
It's a real challenge. I mean, you have brands that are born and bred here doing great that have to go outside of the city to have their beverages manufactured. Why? Why do we have to go all the way to Dallas? Why do we have to go to Austin? We should be able to do it here. And
you'd figure there's just enough that with the right entrepreneur, investor, there's enough to fill a capacity of a, small to medium, facility with what we've got today and with more room to grow and to expand on. But it's just something we haven't addressed here in this city. I hope that, those that are, trying to grow infrastructures are listening, because it is something that you build it, and it's not that they will come, you build it, they're already here.
They're here.
And more will come.
Yes. And, that's part of one of the goals of San Antonio CPG is just to kind of bring the attention to the fact that there are all these businesses, there are these founders, and they just need either the manufacturing or they need a little bit of funding, and just getting attention on that, because I don't think people realize everyone was kind of spread out doing their own thing. We're kind of collectivizing now. We're trying to come up some numbers and metrics to show the city like we're here, and this could be a great source of economic development if they lean into it.
Absolutely. I mean, those are good jobs. I mean, it's not the old Laverne and Shirley, putting the bottle caps on. These are more technical, high-tech jobs, that deal with, robots and those sort of things, for it. Let's kind of go on a journey together to think through on this, or to talk about CPG. So, we talk to founders all the time. We've had, CPG founders that have been on the podcast with us, which have been great. But let's kind of start with the person that's like, I have a really good brand idea for a CPG item. What's the first step they should be thinking about from a legal standpoint?
Oh, sure. So you just have an idea. Well, you should really be thinking about the full story. You should really be thinking about the mission. You should be thinking about the branding. I cannot stress this enough. Even if you have a great product, it's got great efficacy, it does what it says it's going to do. The branding is everything,
right?
Because you're you're competing with all those other items on shelf or all the other opportunities out there for similar products. You need to create something that, in terms of grabbing eyes, it's going to grab your consumer and it's going to tell the story. So you're thinking about the product label. Well, now you've just pulled in legal and regulatory concerns. I mean, it just starts from the very beginning.
That's
when you think, well, what do I want my product to look like? If it's a beverage, what do I want the can to look like? Well, you've got to consider trademarking. You've got to consider, are you going to try and put claims on pack?
Yep.
There's a lot of things. Or who's going to design your logo? Do you have a contract with that individual? Because maybe they're going to own that logo and you're not going to.
Or do you even know if that logo is infringing upon somebody else's logo?
I know.
Right? Which some of these people are a dime a dozen. They don't realize you're the third person they've sold that one to, and that are out there. It's funny because, for tech companies, the names are their products are something that's important, but the overall brand of the company is a little bit different versus CPG. Usually that's one and the same. That's so important. And I can't tell you how many times it's been what's in that name, to me where I'm like, oh, that's a great name. And I Google a little bit and go, hey, did you check, USPTO? Did you just do a Google search to see if anybody pops out? And people go, oh, I didn't. And then they realize they've got to do a rebrand.
Right.
And sometimes those rebrands, even on an early stage, can be make or break, because with very little money and somebody getting a cease and desist letter, which we get those quite a bit here for clients, it just happens. Most of them aren't legit, but it's intellectual property has a value to it. It can really cause chaos. What are some things that founders can do to try to be a little bit more proactive when they're thinking about just even the name of their product?
Sure. Well, some of the things that you just suggested, Google search, look everywhere, see what people have. Do they have a website? Are there other social media? On Instagram, does someone have something similar? And I highly suggest going to the USPTO, United States Patent and Trademark Office, has this search function where you can search both registered trademarks and ones that people have just applied for. And it's really easy. It's a Google search. Once you get into it, you can type in any number of words or phrases or whatever you think you want to use. And you can kind of help see, am I going to knock some out automatically? Something similar? That puts you in a better position when you talk to an attorney.
Right.
And they're going in and they're doing the more comprehensive review.
Well, and something that's a misconception, and we get it a lot, is Secretary of State registration versus trademarking. And the simple answer is the Secretary of State will file anything that's not similar to another entity name, the legal name. So, that's one check. But that's just with checking on getting your entity filed.
In Texas, too.
In Texas.
And USPTO.
But for USPTO, it's first to whoever uses it.
Right.
Even if they necessarily trademark it, which some people are like, wait a minute, if I get a trademark, I'm good. Well, I've got clients that have a trademark and they go, well, hey, we missed it, but we've been operating for 23 years. You got your trademark 3 years ago. We're going to challenge it. Now that's more of an uphill battle for them because they missed it. But the reality is it's the first to use those has those prior rights, and people just don't realize it. Now, for many times, it doesn't really matter for non-CPG companies. So if you're going to have a yard business, you don't need to go look and see, well, Matt, this guy in New York's got a yard business that's called this little, right? But for CPG, it's huge because the intent is to distribute these things nationally, if not globally. So you will enter those, interstate commerce markets versus if you're just going to be the neighborhood restaurant, which I ran into another Munchies in Miami. And I'm like, wait a minute, we got a Munchies in San Antonio, completely different menu, by the way. Different story, right?
Yeah.
What is it that you usually walk your clients through with regard to the names, and just double checking those?
Sure. Well, we go through what the proposed names are. I usually say have some options. Don't just settle on one. Have some options that you're thinking of. It's just really the 101 of trademarking. Have something unique. Have something that's not descriptive. Have something that's not going to, if you go to register, completely get just kind of booted out. Because sometimes people, they err on something that's more descriptive.
Right.
But that's a problem that I have seen with the it's not first to file.
Right.
It's first to use.
Right.
And I've had instances in the past with clients that have just barreled forward. They've been, they start their business in Texas. They work with a marketing agency, and the marketing agency says, "Oh, this is great. The name's fine.
Yep.
You're good."
Of course they do, because they want you to pay the money.
Right.
They don't want you to, because then they have to sell you the rebrand package, which is almost as much as the other. They'll never get to the actual advertising package. We know how y'all work.
Yeah. And then they say, "Oh, it's good. You can go move forward it." And now you've got your website up. You've got your ads out. And then you get the cease and desist from someone out of another state saying, "Oh, I'm using this," or "I registered it." And like you were saying, now you're backtracking. Now you've got the rebrand. So trying to get all of that straightened out in the beginning is the most important. And also, I have to say, the website, if you get a website, a URL is not a registration. That is not a guaranteed trademark.
And neither is an assumed name or DBA, because so many say, "Well, I have the DBA." Well, here's another thing too, is you can file a DBA, I can file the DBA, you can file the DBA for the exact same DBA, and the state of Texas doesn't care. I can say I'm McDonald's, just like the McDonald's down the road. They'll let McDonald's come get me from a trademark standpoint.
Right.
That doesn't matter. And I can't tell you how many times, "Well, I got that DBA." That doesn't do anything for you.
Right.
So from a URL standpoint, when you get that website address, be careful too, because I had one client come to me, potential client, I should say, not a client. And they said, "Well, this people, they work on, this is their name, but I got the URL so I can use it." Well, there's other laws that are out there regarding URL hijacking that, that can come in and just wreak havoc on that. And so it really is making sure, especially when something's so brand centered, that you've got to get that brand right to talk to someone to make sure that all those boxes are checked.
Right. And the other thing I would say is, people say, "Oh, it's so expensive to get, the legal work or trademark registration." It's kind of insurance for your brand in the long run, right? Like you have insurance on your house or your car or your life. It's kind of like an insurance on your brand. And why do you care? Because if you want to get to the point where you want to scale it, like you want to move it beyond kind of like a legacy brand, and you want to exit, you want to have someone to come in and purchase. I mean, your intellectual property, your IP is everything. That's going to be the first thing they look at.
And it's highly scrutinized.
Highly scrutinized to make sure. I mean, when you are going through the process and that due diligence is happening, IP is at the top of the list to make sure that you have everything in order. And if you don't, that's going to slow down the process or maybe even end it.
Well, and let's talk about another part of the IP, especially in the beverage world, which is like recipes. Everybody knows Coke doesn't have a patent on its recipe. It is literally a trade secret, and they have to protect that in order to make sure. I mean, Pepsi tried to reverse engineer it. Now we've got Pepsi, which I can drink either. Everybody's got their preference on that. But what are some of the thoughts and what are the things that you tell your clients with regard to protecting those trade secrets that make those brands so valuable, like in the food and beverage industry?
Sure. I say non-disclosure agreements are your friend, and they don't have to be anything scary, and they don't have to be anything, 10 pages long. Just get some document in place when you're working with, and usually at the beginning, maybe it's just you, maybe it's you and a co-founder.
Right.
But you've got a very small team, so you're going to be working with subcontractors. You're going to be working with someone helping you with marketing, or you're going to be working with a co-manufacturer.
Yep.
You really have to have something in place that's going to say, "Hey, I'm going to give you this proprietary information, and you're going to keep it secret, and you're not going to share it." I mean, the NDA is your friend.
Yep.
And it seems like founders don't think about that until they're already, again, like I said, you're too far down the line. You can't close the box up.
And they don't think about it with regard to each other. Mm-hmm. Because and I'm sure you've experienced this too, co-founders, like any relationship, is great at the beginning usually, but then stress comes. I mean, as we talk about, it's the school of hard knocks that you go through. And when you get that pressure, it pressures on relationships. Getting both of the founders to contribute the intellectual property of their own into the company at the beginning is critical as well.
Yes.
Getting anybody that works on it that says, "Hey, if you work for us, we own it. We don't have to pay you any more money." Because, from a tech standpoint, it's a little bit easier for them. They don't have to think about it as much because they get the code in their systems that is there. But literally somebody, especially in the food and beverage, they can take that recipe and go right over to a competitor and go, all right, we'll just change the brand, do a different brand, same taste, and this is great. And now you're looking at going, all right, it's 2 Cokes, as opposed to a Coke and a Pepsi type of situation.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. And so, getting in front of the issue, trying to be very preemptive about it is your best bet.
And I always tell people too, an NDA doesn't have to be scary, but it's only as good as you're willing to enforce them too. And so it's a must-have. It's not a will we do it? No, it's a must-have. But then you do have to realize that, like, if a co-founder who has that, assignment, has a non-disclosure, ability, goes and does that, unfortunately, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, we've got to do a cease and desist. And if they're not going to listen, we're going to have to sue them, because you have to protect your intellectual property. If you don't, then you're basically saying, well, it's not worth protecting. And then it just kills everything, which is another surprise, an unfortunate surprise for a lot of companies that are heavy in the intellectual property, which is why I always tell them, make sure you trust who that piece of paper is with to a level that you don't have to get to it. And if you have that funny feeling about that, you're better off probably not having that relationship than engaging in it, because that paper doesn't solve it. It is your vehicle, but it doesn't solve it.
No. And you have to be willing, like you said, to defend it. I mean, and that happens, on the trademark side too. I mean, if you don't use it, you lose it.
That's right.
And you've got to be willing to keep your eyes out on anybody. And if anyone is coming near infringing your product, you have to be proactive.
Yep. I mean, and there are people that buy these portfolios and they are tenacious.
Yes.
Vicious, I'd actually say, to some extent, for the fact that they buy these brands. But I mean, that is where these values lies in these brands and what they've created. So going down the journey, we talked a little about intellectual property. The next step is, and this is probably more of a common founder situation, is what about governance and how they structure themselves, from a governance standpoint? What are your experiences there?
Sure. I think it's very important at the beginning to figure out like what sort of entity you want to operate under, because you're going to have a lot of different requirements and things that you're going to have to follow. So you're going to have to determine at the very beginning whether you want to operate as an LLC, if you want to be a corporation. And dependent on that, that's going to mean you're going to have to follow up on the corporate governance responsibilities. It is what it is. So in terms of having a board and, having all the paperwork and all the resolutions and all the things that go along with maintaining that governance. But that's kind of part of how it goes. I know people jump into it and they say, well, I don't know how to do it. You learn it. You learn it, and you hired advisors and you network. I think that's one of the great things with the San Antonio CPG trade group here is trying to connect people, to network, to say, hey, look, I went down the road this way, and if I could go back 4 years, like here's what I would, here's what you should do, or here I can connect you with someone. So, you've got to have those things figured out at the beginning.
Wisdom comes through errors, and failures, and they always say the real wise people listen to the wise people that have been down the road and can avoid them. But the reality is, we still have to figure things out. From a personal opinion, and by the way, we may disagree, and that's okay. We didn't script this one. Where do you usually start people out? In an LLC, in a corporation? What's your thoughts on that?
I start them out in an LLC.
Okay, we agree on that.
It's just so they can get protected. Because a lot of times they're operating out there just as a sole proprietor, and there's just too much risk. I mean, especially where you have a product like a food or beverage product someone's consuming. The error that something is going to go wrong and someone could get sick, and not through any fault of anyone. I mean, so sometimes things happen. Things get cross-contaminated, or, it is what it is. It is very important to have that entity distinction there, so that if you did have a suit, if you had any claim, that is completely separate and distinct from any of your personal assets. And I oftentimes I'll draw it out on a piece of paper and I'll circle one. Here's your business assets, and I'll circle the other one. And I say the entity is how you keep them distanced. And just in terms of, worrying about like governance and things like that, I feel like the LLC is so much easier to maintain in the beginning.
And, we do quite a bit of conversions at the right time.
Right.
I mean, from an LLC standpoint, people are usually shelling out money for logos and marketing and lawyers, right? Well, at least for that bootstrapping period, as I tell people, you're getting a tax. You get to write that off on your personal taxes. It goes against your ordinary income. It's coming out of your pocket, your bank account. You might as well get the benefit. You put it into a C Corp, well, that's different, on what you're doing. You're locking up those losses in there. And it's the complexity of it. Right. I mean, we do have several C Corp, and, we have to have a board meeting. We have to make sure there's resolutions. We have to versus an LLC, as long as you get it up right, it gives you a lot of flexibility to do that. And again, when, the right opportunity comes with, VC funding or something else that wants you to move to that level, you can.
But I would say make sure you keep your records, though. I'm not saying have the LLC, like if you're having, friends and family are giving money, like make sure you have like a clear cap table. I mean, make sure your paperwork is in order. Right. But it's a way to just get going, because really to know if it's going to happen, if it's going to take off, you just have to start doing it.
That's right. And even making sure the LLC is right, if you have more than one owner, is critical.
Yes.
Because having my own LLC, it's no big deal. I mean, who's going to make a choice? Well, it's my LLC. It's just me. But you bring in somebody else other than a spouse, which if you're married, it's your spouse's anyway. It's community property. But if you bring in a third party on this, you need to make sure that you've thought out for, is it 50-50? What happens when we have a deadlock? Because, again, times get tough. And if you've got more than one person, those decisions are no longer just one person's. Usually it's two. And then what happens? The what ifs increase dramatically.
And that's why I don't even think 50-50. I mean, you've really got to determine who's going to take the lead, because a 50-50 means you're stagnant, you're standing still. And within the CPG industry, you can't stand still. You've got to be running full speed ahead. I
always tell people deadlock has the word dead in it, because you're dead and locked. And they were like, well, how do we get around this? Well, you're deadlocked. Yeah. So you either go down to the courthouse and we petition a court to dissolve all of this, at which point in time, who knows where it goes, or you figure it out. And most of the time, when you file a lawsuit to go do that, which we've done, you get there, but you've wasted thousands of dollars, for this. And the company has died, and somebody has to revamp it. But being proactive, and figuring out the governance, I prefer no 50-50s. 50-40, 51-49 with, some sort of, if you disagree, there's a process to go through. But at the end of the day, somebody says, we're taking a left, we're not taking a right, because if not, you're just going to sit there.
Yes.
From a operation standpoint, so we talked about governance, we talked about intellectual property. What's the next step of, for a CPG company to be looking through kind of on this journey? Is it contracts? Is it HR? Is it, FDA? What is it?
I think the regulatory piece is very important too, and it depends on kind of, are you producing in the home? Are you producing in a facility? That sort of thing.
Right.
So certainly if you're producing at home, that's going to be a little different than if you're working with a co-man, and you need to make sure that they have the right documents in place and that they're covering you in the GMP, good manufacturing practices, covered. On that same token, with the regulatory, I'm going back to the product label. I highly suggest that you have a regulatory individual review that label to make sure everything from the nutritional facts to the claims made on pack are reviewed, and make sure that you're falling within the legal limits. You never want to get into a situation where you're claiming something that is misleading or untruthful.
Right.
Usually it's, you have to worry not necessarily about the FDA. You have to worry about your competitors. Those are the people that are looking at your products. Those are the people that are scrutinizing your label.
That's right.
That are trying to say, well, can they say this?
They're the ones that'll turn you in.
They'll turn you in.
FDA's not watching your website. Your competitors are. They'll throw you
They'll
over there.
They'll turn you in. So you want to throw healthy on there. You want to throw natural. Okay, make sure that you can. Make sure you go through those steps.
Well, and that's, beyond the label, right? It's all of that marketing, whenever you have any CPG, from the fact of, consumer complaints, Texas, other very strong consumer-friendly states, you don't realize if you've got, misleading practices, it's a lawsuit. It's called the Deceptive Trade Practices Act. That lawsuit, in a way, can be your worst nightmare because it allows for potential treble damages, pain and suffering, attorney's fees. It's nasty. Now, how do you defend yourself against that? Be honest. Don't have deceptive practices. Don't make false, representations of what it can do or can't do. Just be, transparent of what it is and get a regulatory person.
Right.
Especially for the health, the FDA and those, I don't know if you do the FDA. Do you do the FDA review?
No, I have a consultant that I refer people out to. And that's part of like working with an attorney, right? They're going to have that network. They're going to have people that you should go to next.
That's right.
To check and go through when you're doing your audit of like, am I a healthy business? Is this going to be sustainable? Because you can put a product out there, but if you don't have these pieces in order, you're not going to be sustainable out there in the market.
Well, and I'll tell you that from a marketing standpoint, in my experience, and I have consultants as well, for that. You have to keep up on it. And, we're busy enough. We can't keep up on every little thing. But, you have to balance aggressive marketing in order to grow with, are you going to get yourself in trouble from a regulatory standpoint or for consumer complaint that's out there? Because, you want to grow. And I've had it many times where like, well, we have to be able to say that it can do this. And I'm like, yeah, but the consultant's saying, but you can't demonstrate that that's true. You haven't done the study, none of those things. So if you go out there and say that, you're going to get sued. So yeah, you may get a little bump in sales, but when the lawsuit comes and just cripples the company, it's over.
Gonna cut it.
And so quick money and those and they listened, by the way, which is great because for me, I'm sometimes evaluating my clients going, okay, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with this, for these claims. But do you have those kind of experiences that you could share just with the whole aggressive marketing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the marketing team usually wants to get out there and they want to say the most robust thing they possibly can, but it's got to be tied back to science. And I think that's what a lot of CPG founders need to understand. It has to be backed by science. There has to be research and studies that are showing that, it can support this or it can do that, or can't just say it because it seems on brand and it seems like it's kind of in line with what your product is supposed to do. You really have to have something that's backed by science and is vetted by someone that has kind of looked at, all right, well, what are you basing on it? What studies are you basing it on? Because you never want to get into a situation where now you're hovering into, especially for things like supplements. Yeah. You start moving into prescriptions. Now you're on you're on a whole different journey.
You're toast.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the government, when you start making those kind of things, they will find you. They don't wait for, a competitor will tell them, but they'll find you on those type of things. Yeah. Going through that journey, on there, I wanted to ask you about manufacturing because in CPG, it's kind of like in the tech world, we deal a lot with development agreements, right? And you have to be really careful in your development agreements. Same thing with manufacturing agreements. You got some people that are going, well, they're just going to make it for me. What are some of the tips and tricks for manufacturing agreements, like just a couple of them that people should be thinking about when they enter into some sort of manufacturing agreement for somebody to produce their goods?
Sure. They have to make sure that manufacturer can continuously produce their product on spec. So you want to make sure you have a rigorous kind of pre-testing period where you have them manufacture the product and then you come and test it multiple times in different batches, because they can make it great once and the next time, they got second shift crew comes in and it's totally off spec. So you want to make sure that you're vetting these manufacturers. The other problem in this world is there's only so many manufacturers that produce in certain containers. So there's only so many manufacturers that can, put that product in a pouch or put that product in a bottle. So you want to do your research too and see who's out there, who's going to work best for you. But I would say probably the first thing is just to make sure that they are making it consistently on spec and that you have language in your agreement that is going to speak to when they don't make it to spec.
Right.
Crisis management, because again, it's not will it happen,
and
it's
recalls,
when will it happen,
and those sort of things.
Recalls, yes, certainly.
Quality is the biggest thing.
Everything.
I mean, you still don't want to miss the fact of you've got to get your intellectual property protected, right? So that's kind of a basic, but the quality is a huge thing. And most founders, first-time founders, they're not thinking about that. They're like, oh, look at this. Isn't it beautiful? Okay. But, shards. I mean, we even see great brands here in this community with recalls. I mean, H-E-B had a bunch of stuff of their own stuff recalled. It happens.
It happens. I mean, most of these manufacturing plants, they're not just producing your product. You got to think about the lines and lines of multiple products they're pushing through.
And then they shift over lines. And then and so, from a process standpoint, from a quality assurance, quality indicators, inspection periods, those are the most critical parts. But yeah, people think just because I get a prototype or if I get, a couple of samples of what this is, just let them go free. No, you've got to take on some of that ownership too, to make sure that you've got intermittent samples that you do and it's agreed upon. And again, the rework and those sort of things.
Right.
What is it from outside of the manufacturing that you see as one of the most common questions of those type of just nuts and bolts operations questions? What do you see the most of?
I think growing the team, because at some point you reach a level where you just can't do it on your own.
Right.
So it's who to bring in strategically that's going to be kind of worth the cost, because you're working with, such little at the end of the day after you've paid for all the manufacturing and everything you're working. So determining whether it's someone like a fractional CFO or a fractional operations person. You can get an operations person to come in and say, hey, look, you're taking your product and you're putting it on shelf. It's on all these retail shelves. That's great. But you're paying all these not hidden, but extra fee. I think a lot of fees that maybe emerging
distributors
brands
will kill you.
The distributors will kill you.
Distributors will make it act like look at all this volume you're moving, and you're actually losing for every unit you move.
And you're losing. So, you need someone to come in and say, hey, maybe instead of focusing so much on retail on shelf, why don't we build D2C, direct to consumer.
Right.
Why don't we kind of have a focus on that more? We have better margins in that area. So I think, the next step is operations and how to bring someone in that can now take you to the next level because they have that level of expertise.
Yeah.
They can bring in that analysis and say, okay, here's where the wins are. Here's the easy wins. Here's the more challenging wins. But here's a good plan.
Yeah. So let's talk about distribution a little bit, because that is a challenge, right? The margins aspect. Getting on the shelf at H-E-B or Walmart. That's a massive milestone for a CPG company. But most people would think, well, if I could just get on the shelf, that's it. Well, nope.
You got to stay there.
More money, more problems. You got to stay there. You got to be relevant because, there's the priority. Talk a little bit about that with regard to, those major retailers and distributors and how you actually get on the shelf.
Sure. Well, and that's why it's so important to have an operations person because there's so much lead time that you need. So you've got to work through the whole structure of your company and I would say the life cycle of your product to figure out, when I get on shelf, when I get that opportunity, can I meet the demand? Can I continue to stay on shelf? Because sometimes that's your one chance.
That's right.
That's your one chance. And if you can't get on shelf, keep the products on shelf, or you get on shelf and you can't sell it, which would be kind of the worst case scenario.
Right.
You're off, and it's a hard time to get back on. So you've got to kind of work with, and sometimes it's working even with like a fractional CFO and someone that can do kind of the forecasting and say, all right, well, we can put more money into manufacturing so we can have this many units and they hit shelves by this day. If you don't like numbers, if you don't like planning, if you don't like this may not be the
you can do the direct
to
consumer, right? Because the supply demand is different, right? But when the SKUs come in and you need X amount and you can't fill them, well, then you just took a big hit with whoever that distributor, or if you're putting it directly on the shelves for some of these larger big boxes. And cash kills you.
Yes.
People will be like, the tech people get it because, they're spending millions of dollars, but they're putting it directly into that product to build it. It's growing, that sort of stuff. And to sell an incremental unit usually costs them, there's a cost of customer acquisition, but it's fractional.
Right.
Versus to get that product out, you got to have millions of dollars potentially just to have inventory so that way you can go make your margin.
Yeah.
That you don't really, it shocks so many new founders on this. And again, good a CFO, a COO that can come in there and help you. That means everything to being able to meet those opportunities.
I think people are shocked about how much it takes and how much you will be in the red.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
That's right.
And that's part of the process of scaling.
Now, from a greater landscape, I've had some good friends that were within Nestle. Mm-hmm. And it used to be that they would do their own, spend millions, hundreds of millions of dollars developing their own brands in the kitchen with all their test kitchens. Mm-hmm. It's kind of changed now.
Absolutely.
Where it's cheaper for them to actually acquire a brand that somebody else takes all that red versus them do all the R&D. Now there's tax credits and those sort of things, so they do some of that. What's your experience on the end of these? Are you seeing a lot of acquisitions, or what is the end of the rainbow look like, so to speak?
Sure. I mean, when you get to a point where you really are, you're not just out there, you're out there and you're a threat. You're out there and you're really making sales. You're out there and you are a true competitor. I mean, that's when the larger companies are coming in and they're looking and saying, okay, it makes more sense to buy it up and then to fight it. And I think it's different now with social media. I think it's kind of changed kind of the industry in the sense that you don't necessarily have to get on shelves.
No.
You can have an incredible TikTok channel and have truly the power of social media has been wild. And so you're not necessarily even competing with other brands on shelf. You're there, you can have an emerging brand out there that's doing very well because they know exactly who their consumer is. They know who their customer. They're speaking directly to them. Maybe they have a story or something back in that mission, that mission statement that kind of drives those sales. And that person's going to be a real threat in the space, whatever space you're in, whether in the food space or the beauty space, what have you. Because that's where like a lot of connections made. It's hard to make a connection when you're just sitting on shelf with your packaging, right?
Oh, I know.
You're just sitting there and maybe you can have like, something, a little hanger-on label. So different when you've got a founder and they've got a TikTok and they're talking about the product and they're talking about their story and what they, their mission and what they plan to do. I mean, that's powerful stuff.
So I had this conversation with somebody once about like crowded shelves. Mm-hmm. And, I go to the grocery store. Everybody goes to the grocery store. You kind of have what you're looking for. You don't just go in and go, well, I want chips. I mean, you're kind of like, I need tortilla chips. And at least you can narrow it down. But I had this conversation about like with whiskey and for, spirits. The boom we saw during, I guess, because everybody was moonshining during COVID. I don't know. Everybody wanted to own one. You go down an aisle to look at like whiskey or something. There's like 500 bottles of different bottles there. And you go, well, which one do I want? Right? It's very, very, very difficult. But the way that most people have it is social media. And then that brand that allows you to go, oh, okay, I'm going to go to this one versus other ones. And then sometimes people pick the pretty bottle, like I guess they do in tequila. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't drink that. But, it's very, very tough to be on those crowded shelves to do that. So anyway, let me ask you another question that I was thinking about as well, which was on the the direct to goods with social media. AI is now everywhere, right? And it happens where you go and you just scroll just a little bit too long on Instagram on an ad, and the next thing you know, you're getting hit on all those markets. And that's that D2C, as you talked about. What do you see as the future for people to be able to leverage AI with marketing and going direct to consumer?
I think the world is wide open right now with what you can do with AI. I would say be careful though. In terms of marketing, I think AI is going to help do a good job in terms of if you can anonymize it, you can do a lot of, throwing your numbers in, it can do analysis and strategy. I'd be concerned about marketing. I'd be concerned about anything consumer facing because right now, you won't own it. Right. So especially, for generative AI, everything gets fed in and then it spits out, an amalgamation of what it thinks is going to answer your question best. And so if you're trying to create content and you're trying to create copy or photos or logos or that sort of thing, maybe that's a starting point. Maybe that gives you some ideas of where you can lean into. But I wouldn't just say, hey, Gen AI tool, write copy for me for my social media posts. Right. You don't own it. Right. And there's now some issues out there with different writers and creators, and they're filing lawsuits against these companies that create this Gen AI because they're saying, well, you put my information in there, now it's getting spit out and people are using it and they're claiming it as their own. And again, it goes back to the IP. It becomes like who owns it, whose is it, and it's just so new right now that there's not any court cases. Like, there's no precedent. The law is way behind. It's going to take forever to catch up, and there's no court cases out there as to definitively saying yes to this or no to that. It's all gray area now.
Well, you can use it like a painter can use a paintbrush, but if it does it all on its own, it's a robot, so you can't. It's not anybody's. It's basically common. I think my theory is that generative AI is going to kill creativity, and the reason why is copycats will easily, like, you're going to have somebody that's truly creative. AI will figure out how to get it into its thing and then generate it all over the place. At which point in time, it moves so fast. Can you really defend your creativity on that? I think it'll cause problems, like for, creating, fake products, which I think can potentially dilute real products. I worry for the creatives part of what it's going to do to the creatives and what they do in order to monetize their creativity. Because, it's just so fast. You go on there on generative AI now, it's on the phone. Like, they had, what was the original one that was, that would do like the artwork? I don't remember, but it's only like a year old, but you had to do a lot, and like you had to be kind of a nerd to use it. Now I saw on the ad, like on your Samsung, draw caploosh or something like that, and it does like all these iterations, and you're going, okay, well, how are we ever going to know what's truly creative versus what's generative? I'm seeing pictures. I saw a picture from a friend, and it looked like he went on vacation, and he goes, nah, that's just my new AI one. I didn't go at all. And I'm like, I would have sworn he was there. You know what I'm saying? I just worry that the world of creativity is going to really kill and make that just so problematic. Sorry, I'm going doom and gloom today on this one. So I ain't got any answers. I'm just, saying it's going to get really stormy out there. I think weatherman.
You already have, but you have the issue of copycatters already. You have the issue of resellers. You have these issues already.
But it's the speed at which they can do it. That's the difference, right?
But do they have lasting power? So I think it comes down to trust too.
True.
Which is why your story and your why isn't so important.
That's a good point.
Because
it's brand loyalty and culture that will tie it, not just the quick.
Right. Because, you have some viral this or some photo. Okay, that's great. It's a flash in a pan. If you're creating something that is truly legacy building or something that's going to grow to the point where it becomes competitor with a competitive product to a larger corporation, you've got to have that staying power. So I don't know how well Gen AI is going to do that, help you create that story.
And see, I'm just thinking through my mind right now, because what I expect to see is marketers already, like, they know who we are. They know our preferences. They've known it. I did an MBA and I was at a bank. It's now been acquired 3 or 4 times, but a very large bank. I was in marketing. When I was doing my MBA, that was what I thought I was going to do before I went to law school. And they could, by your spending habits, because that's the only data points that we have, basically classify you in like one of like, I don't know, it was like 50 different categories of who you were. Now, though, they can literally define it to like, what's Matt interested in this week?
Yeah. It's so niche now. It's incredible.
But the crazy thing on all that is, again, like, I'm getting so many ads that are so very different. You almost wonder if they're going to start telling me what I'm already thinking because of how I'm searching. And that's how they're going to market it to me. And I just worry that, this is just the worry. Be careful with AI on there, that it's going to completely change the CPG world with regard to marketing for those. But you brought up brand, right? And culture and mission-driven products people attach to. Once you get into it, I love my Free Fly shirts. I love the brand. I love the way they feel. I'm loyal. I see copycats all day long. I only buy one because I'm loyal to it.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's a brand called Nopalera.
Okay.
It's a Latina female founder, and she's mission driven. She's creating beauty products based off of the nopal, and she's done incredible in terms of fundraising because she knows her product, she knows her brand, she has her story, and she puts it out there very succinctly. And so her product has been. Now it's got distributed nationwide, and it really comes down to like knowing who your consumer is and being niche, but also saying, this is an aspirational brand as well.
Right.
So you get to the niche piece first, you get to that consumer, and then you open it up to the general public.
We also, and you mentioned this at the beginning, we share a passion for educating because with startups, with founders, I mean, we're not even scratching on any of the surface. We're just kind of just pointing at things saying, hey, you might want to know. Talk a little bit about what you do to educate founders in the CPG world. You had mentioned it earlier in the episode here.
Sure, yeah. So as I said, I'm part of San Antonio CPG, and I'm on the education committee. So what we do is every month we have hour-long education sessions where you learn about building your product. We started at the very beginning with the foundational pieces. We talked about creating your entity and branding and getting insurance in place. We didn't talk about that, but insurance is
I thought about it
important.
a second ago. If you're having anybody consume anything or sending it out there, get insurance, entity and insurance.
Yeah. But we've moved on to talking about financing. We're going to talk about marketing. There's other things we're going to talk about in the fall. Providing education through that. And also my company, Mija Learns, which is, focused specifically on helping brands build and grow. It's for people that they're not ready to jump yet into hiring an attorney, but they kind of want some basis understanding of how to get into CPG and what it looks like, because it is such a huge world and there's so many components. And like we talked about, manufacturing and supply and distribution, and it helps at the beginning to kind of understand like what you're getting into.
It's a lot
before you have that launch.
It's a lot, but I mean, it's fascinating. Again, as we talked about, I love it because the product literally the product itself, and when it's out there, it's just absolutely amazing to see somebody go from creation to actually, having that in the marketplace. Last couple questions for you here. What is one of the biggest mistakes you see founders make?
I think creating too many products too quickly. One product.
They come in with the portfolio. We're going to do A, B, C, D, and all the way to double X.
Start with one. Start with one, and like I cannot stress enough, like know your consumer, like know that person, know exactly who's going to want that product. Get great at that one product, and then you can work off of it. That can be the brand builder. It helps you build out your portfolio. But get really good with one and show great sales with one, because in the end, that's what the large retailers, you want to get into these big box stores. That's what they care about. At the end of the day, it's sales. So get good with one.
That's great. No, I would be that guy too. I mean, I'm not creative, but I would come and say, well, here, I have a portfolio and here's my strategy for my 7 products versus just do one. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for coming on here. That was really, really interesting. We're glad to have you here as a guest on here, and we're looking forward to seeing more and more of what you do in the community here with CPG, and just also here at Geekdom, because I know you're very active of helping the startup and founder community. So we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did in getting to talk with Amanda. And as you can see, there's a lot of universal things that all founders go through, but there are some specific ones that CPG founders find themselves in on day one. Now, as always, we hope we've provided value to you, and we would love it if you would click subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on our next episode here, episode 52 coming up. And also, if you want to leave us a comment or leave Amanda a comment, we'd love to hear from you and to hear your ideas of how we can continue to grow our innovative community. Until next time, we'll see you then.